On March 11th, 2026, the internet's favorite legal scholar, Anthony Robert D'Amato Jr., Zero Dark Tony, was back at it. He sat in front of his camera, grinding Costco coffee beans, and issued a series of what he called promises, not threats. And if you've been following this saga for any length of time, you probably recognize the melody immediately.
Yeah, Zoe, it was a very bad cover of a song we've heard before. He's talking about subpoenas again.
Exactly. But this time, he's added a new twist. He's claiming that issuing subpoenas to unmask anonymous critics is actually his Sixth Amendment constitutional right. And he framed any resistance to that idea as a confession. Let's hear it.
Because it is legally, it is not illegal, right? And letting people know that subpoenas are going to happen so that I can put them on a witness stand, that is my right. Okay? In fact, what a subpoena is, it is my Sixth Amendment constitutional right. It is my Sixth Amendment constitutional right. And I'm going to exercise that. And the people that have something to lose as far as getting a subpoena, actually being identified and put on a witness stand to testify under oath so that my attorneys can question them, that's my Sixth Amendment right. So for any dumbass who's out there bucking at a subpoena, it's because they're doing something wrong. And they know it.
That's the premise. If a subpoena scares you, you must be guilty.
Which sounds very dramatic. Also, that's not how subpoenas work.
Not even a little. But he keeps going. He says critics are on a list. He says this is his constitutional right. He names Chi specifically. And for those he doesn't name, like you, Cody, he's got a term. You are an invisible idiot.
Because just with recent information I have received, my attorneys will handle it. And go ahead and tell me you're scared without telling me, because you fucking invisible idiots are scared. Why? Why are you scared? You want to talk all this shit? Why are you so scared to come up on, identify yourself and get up on a witness stand? Wouldn't you want to be on a witness stand in, like, say, the very future restraining order that is going to be served?
And if you only heard his stream, you'd think subpoenas are basically a magic button. Push it, anonymous critics get unmasked. End of story.
Right. Nice, clean little narrative. Except there's one problem. This exact Sixth Amendment theory already ran into a real courtroom in front of a real judge. And it didn't just fail. It got the subpoenas quashed, got the judge openly concerned about harassment, and got Tony's lawyer sanctioned.
Today, we're going to look at the subpoena Woodchipper. We're going back to the summer and fall of 2025 to show you exactly what these subpoenas demanded, why the judge was so alarmed by Tony's own words, and why his current promises are hitting a very hard legal wall.
And the answer turns out to involve live stream threats, anonymous critics, YouTube watch histories, a missing lawyer, and one very revealing Exhibit A.
Welcome to Context and Character, where we examine how predatory behavior persists in plain sight, not because it's hidden, but because systems normalize it.
Let's set the stage. We're in the middle of Mindy Willens versus Anthony R. D'Amato Jr., a civil harassment case in Los Angeles. And Tony's attorney at the time, Stephen Tamer, helps Tony go on the offensive. He issues sweeping subpoenas to YouTube, Reddit, and X.
And when we say sweeping, we mean sweeping. These weren't just aimed at the petitioner and respondent. They reached out into the commentary community. They targeted non-party accounts like CleeSpeaks, Dodge Landisman, True Crime with Nora, Scientology Audit, and my account, Hero Like Cody. Now, Scientology Audit is also known as Film the Police LA or William Good. He has a huge following.
So the subpoena list swept in more well known critics and adjacent commentators, which is part of why the whole thing felt so sprawling. And the scope of what they wanted was staggering: your identity information, private messages, deleted videos, unlisted and private content, account records, and my personal favorite, YouTube watch histories.
That's the one that still gets me. My watch history? That's not evidence of harassment. That would just prove I stay up too late and let an algorithm control me.
Right, an insomnia timeline. Not exactly relevant to a civil harassment restraining order case. It's someone watching one normal video and then 40 minutes later somehow ending up on top 10 ancient naval disasters or the entire history of cement.
Is that what your algorithm feeds you, Zoe?
Well, yeah. Isn't everyone's?
So, anyway, watch history is not an evidence packet. It's curiosity, it's boredom, it's research, it's rabbit holes, it's someone's private viewing life.
And that is what makes it so invasive. A subpoena in a civil case is supposed to be a targeted request for evidence relevant to the dispute. This didn't look targeted, it looked like a dragnet. It's like demanding the post office hand over the private mail of your neighbor because you're in a dispute about your property line.
Just because you don't like the fact that your rival has supporters?
Exactly. So, legally, Merritt McKeon, counsel for Mindy Willens, called it what it looked like: a fishing expedition. And that matters because these are civil harassment proceedings. They're supposed to move quickly. They're designed to protect people. They're not supposed to turn into giant third party discovery wars.
Right. Discovery in those cases isn't this automatic, open ended entitlement. The judge later made that point very clearly. She didn't say discovery could never happen. She said there has to be good cause.
And before we even get to good cause, the service issue was also a mess. Tamer's office mailed the notice to consumer to an office address that Merritt McKeon hadn't used in over 2 years. That became part of the motion to quash and part of the broader picture that this whole thing had been handled sloppily.
Merritt was getting weird communications from Google legal support that didn't look normal. Their communications to me were also odd. We were not served these consumer notices of subpoena by Tamer. We got notices from Google, and their responses were so weird. It added to the surreal quality of the whole thing.
Right. When you're getting strange legal notices that look half real and half bot generated, and you're already dealing with a litigant who live streams threats to you constantly, I can absolutely understand why that felt bizarre.
I definitely thought they were scam notices. They looked very fake. You'd think Google would have their legal department together.
But the deeper problem was never just the mailing address and how the subpoenas were served seemingly underhandedly. The real problem was this: why were these subpoenas reaching into the private data of non party critics in the first place?
Yeah. As a non party, I wasn't going to just let him unmask my identity and dig through my private platform data for no reason. So I filed a formal written objection. I also hired a lawyer to serve an official objection to Google when my consumer objection went ignored.
And your objection didn't just say, leave me alone, it laid out an actual legal theory.
I tried.
You argued that you were not a party to the case, that the requested records were irrelevant, and that the subpoena appeared designed to identify and expose commentators rather than obtain evidence relevant to the harassment petition. Let's read part of that. You said, the subpoena seeks information unrelated to the claims in this case and appears designed to identify and expose third party commentators rather than obtain relevant evidence. That's concise, and it gets right to the point.
Yeah, because once you strip away the drama, the question becomes very simple. Why are you subpoenaing private records from people who are not parties to the case?
And you went further than that. You argued that unmasking anonymous commentators raises First Amendment concerns because anonymous speech and anonymous association are rights courts have protected for decades.
Right? Once the government or a court process is being used to reveal anonymous speakers, especially critics, that is not something courts are supposed to shrug off.
Right. Okay, so imagine you're cruising down this massive, multi lane legal highway. In one lane, you have this very old foundational right: the right to gather evidence, defend yourself, and confront accusations. In the other lane, merging aggressively right into it, you have the right to free speech.
Those are two heavy hitters.
Exactly. And what happens when they collide at full speed in the digital age? You get friction. You get courts trying to figure out whether traditional discovery tools can handle the sheer scale and privacy of modern digital life.
I'd normally agree with this, but in this case, there was absolutely nothing relevant that would help him defend himself here. So the two lanes didn't really collide. One was just an off ramp to the loony bin.
Okay, but still, in the past, you'd file a subpoena and access a real file folder with a financial record. Now you get subpoenas digging into your emails and your watch history and private information you thought was safe.
Which is why these cases matter beyond just one creator and one lawsuit. Because once subpoenas start reaching for private platform data, you're not just talking about evidence, you're talking about someone's digital interior life. And because Google Legal was clearly not clear about what they were planning to do with our data, I filed the objection and did everything I could to protect it.
And then came Exhibit A.
Yes, Exhibit A. It was just the objection used as an exhibit in Merritt McKeon's motion to quash. Thank goodness for Merritt McKeon. She really worked quite passionately on quashing these subpoenas.
Right, she has had to work really hard to fight back against Tamer's tactics. But using your objection as an exhibit in her motion turned out to be a good move, because your objection didn't just talk about abstract privacy rights. It attached Tony's own words, his own live streams, his own preserved statements describing exactly what he wanted to do once people were identified.
And Zero Dark Tony's own words really seemed to be what got the judge's attention during the hearing. She seemed alarmed, concerned.
And that matters enormously, because now the court doesn't have to guess at intent.
Exactly. Instead of saying, we think this might be retaliatory, the exhibit showed Tony saying the kind of things that made the retaliatory nature obvious.
And some of that material was genuinely chilling. I'll read some of the quotes you put into the objection. Tony said to Cody, "When I find you, I'm going to ruin you and everything about you." He also said that if he snapped, Cody's house would be the first house I would go to.
And he didn't stop there. He told his viewers that once he got everyone's internet shit, he'd have their IDs, addresses, and locations. He talked about coming after jobs, management, reputations, the whole thing.
And then there's this line. He said anonymous critics would be proverbially thrown in the effing legal woodchipper.
Which is one of those moments where he says the quiet part loud enough for the judge to hear it. He can't help himself.
Exactly. This is not a subtle record. This is not, maybe he meant something else. If you're telling your audience that once you get people's information, you're going to ruin them, expose them, and toss them into a legal wood chipper, it becomes much harder for your lawyer to walk into court and say, this is just normal discovery.
That was the turning point. The judge stopped seeing a standard discovery dispute and started seeing a respondent who was potentially using the court process as part of a campaign to hunt and hurt people.
That's exactly what happened. Let's turn to the hearing, October 20th, 2025. And honestly, the hearing itself had one of the most awkward twists imaginable. The attorney who issued the subpoenas, Stephen Tamer, was not there.
Not ideal when the judge is evaluating whether your subpoenas were proper. And guess who else wasn't there?
Oh, that's right, Zero Dark Tony was also a no-show to his big subpoena hearing. So neither Tony nor his lawyer showed up to the hearing to defend their big subpoenas. What a joke.
Yeah, so another attorney, Marianne Borcell, shows up on his behalf and tells the court she can't get a hold of her colleague. She was just coming from another hearing or something and had to jump on to this hearing and seemed pretty flustered.
Didn't she kind of throw him under the bus, saying she was trying to text and call him, but he wouldn't answer?
Yeah, that's how it looked, unless he was just trying to make it look like another emergency for another delay, which put her in a terrible position, and it was quite embarrassing. The judge is asking her the core question: what exactly is the good cause basis for these subpoenas? And the lawyer standing there doesn't know and cannot answer.
That's the kind of courtroom silence that gets loud fast. And according to your notes, Judge Kimberly Rapeka had already reviewed the subpoenas and was already concerned. She explained her view of the law carefully. Discovery in civil harassment cases is not automatically permitted just because someone wants it. It's not an entitlement. There has to be good cause, and the court has to consider whether allowing it would delay the proceedings or abuse the process.
Which is a nuanced position. She didn't say discovery is categorically forbidden. She said there has to be a legitimate reason for it.
Exactly. She even gave examples of scenarios where good cause might exist. like surveillance evidence directly relevant to a defense. So she wasn't being ideological, she was being practical. But then she turned to these subpoenas and said they looked overbroad and irrelevant. And once she reviewed the attached exhibits, including your objection filled with examples of Tony's own statements, Cody, what was your take on the judge's concern there?
Well, she was seriously troubled by the idea that these subpoenas were not being sought in good faith, but as a means to harass people. That's the moment where the case really changes. Because once the court starts viewing discovery not as evidence gathering, but as potential harassment, the entire burden shifts.
So the subpoenas were quashed, not narrowed, not gently revised, gone.
Which is why Zero Dark Tony streams resurrecting the subpoena efforts sounds so disconnected from reality. The court already examined this playbook.
And it did not like what it saw. What's brilliant, Cody, is that the record of what happened with these subpoenas is now actual court record. Now, the universe apparently wanted one more layer of absurdity, so the sanctions issue didn't end on October 20th, despite the subpoenas being quashed. The judge gave Tamer one last chance to explain the good faith reason for issuing the subpoenas before deciding sanctions. That led to the November 20th hearing.
The date Tamer had to appear and justify the subpoenas. He was actually given until November 13th to submit that justification to the court.
Right, to try and explain to the judge that these subpoenas were issued with good cause, which, based on the opposition to the motion to quash and his failure to appear, really felt like a long shot.
And get this, Zoe, you'll never believe this, but Tamer missed the November 13th deadline. He showed up on the 20th and asked for an extension. When I saw that, I could not believe it, because at the October hearing, Judge Rebecca gave really firm instructions. The judge told the attorney who appeared from his firm to relay the court's instructions to Tamer directly. She said he must file a written explanation by November 13th, explaining the good faith basis for the subpoenas. And she warned that if he doesn't, he should expect to be paying the other side's attorney's fees for the hearing. And I remember how awkward it was. I think it was Ms. McKeon who asked whether the court clerk should send email notice to Tamer of the deadline, and the judge actually seemed annoyed and said no. The judge said because he sent someone to stand in from the same firm, it's the same as if he were present.
So he shows up and makes an oral motion for an extension of 2 more days, which the judge denied. And according to the record, the argument he made that day was that the subpoenas were relevant because when the petitioner, Mindy Willens, posted videos about the case, she supposedly received higher than normal views and revenue.
Now, think about that for 1 second. His justification for invading the privacy of third-party anonymous commentators was that the petitioner made money on social media.
Walk me through that logic because I still hate it.
There isn't much to walk through. Even if someone earns revenue from public commentary, that does not magically make the private data of everyone in the surrounding online ecosystem relevant to the claims. There has to be a direct nexus, a real connection between what you're demanding and the allegations you're trying to prove or disprove.
Right. Otherwise, you're just saying, this person exists near the topic, therefore their private data is fair game.
Exactly. It turns proximity into discoverability.
Which is legally ridiculous. It's like demanding access to a bakery's private recipes because you don't like one of the customers who buys bread there.
Okay, that's a weird analogy, but a good one.
Thank you. I work hard. So, the judge was still not impressed. The court explicitly found that social media revenue was not sufficient relevance to justify issuing those subpoenas. That rationale simply did not support the invasion of third-party privacy. And the price tag for that argument? $2,000 as a sanction against Tamer. A judicial consequence. The court saying this crossed a line.
Which means the court did not view this as some innocent misunderstanding. It treated it as an abuse serious enough to make the other side whole for the time and expense of dealing with it.
And that matters a lot because Zero Dark Tony is back to talking about subpoenas.
And you're not going to my personal life anymore because once we get these people's names, we are going to start filing actions against them. And I have the support to do it. And we're going to do it. Because y'all didn't think I was going to have the support to do it. But I do. And I will. 100%. So, for anybody who sees a subpoena as a threat, it's because they know they're doing something wrong. And they know that if they get caught, that they're going to be in big trouble, whether it's civil or criminal or both. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not my problem. It's a subpoena. That's what this is for. Subpoena is for people who are hiding things, or if something needs to be investigated further, right? That's what subpoenas are for. You could subpoena a witness. You could subpoena records. You could subpoena a lot of things, communications. And this is 2026. You can't erase.
On his streams, subpoenas are framed like destiny. In court, they were deemed a fishing expedition that looked like harassment. So that brings us back to the obvious question. Why is Tony back on stream in March 2026 making the same threats against all the invisible idiots, if the strategy already failed so badly in court?
Because even failing subpoena efforts can still function as threats.
Fair point.
Even if a subpoena is legally baseless, the target still has to deal with it. If you're an anonymous critic and you get notice that someone is trying to pull your private platform data from Google or Reddit or YouTube, you don't get to just shrug and move on. You have to decide whether to ignore it, object to it, hire counsel, reveal yourself, spend money, spend time, deal with stress. Even a bad subpoena can impose a real burden.
So the process becomes the punishment.
Exactly. The point may not even be to win the records. The point may be to make criticism exhausting. The only problem is that this kind of thing doesn't exhaust me.
Yeah, Cody, it doesn't really phase you to have to deal with this, but I would imagine this would be emotionally and perhaps financially demanding for other victims. Let's turn to another huge piece of context here. By late 2025, Tony is also navigating a separate criminal case and probation conditions, which helps explain why the current stream rhetoric sounds so coded. He is no longer always using the same names directly. Instead, you hear terms like invisible idiots, anonymous accounts.
Which looks a lot like a rhetorical workaround to avoid witness tampering or violating his probation.
Right, he's trying to preserve the intimidation while avoiding more obvious legal landmines. The threat remains. The naming becomes slipperier.
And let's not forget the ZDT legal fund. Any escalation keeps the funds rolling in. His viewers don't even seem to know how many cases they've funded that he's already lost.
So the intimidation just keeps going. Let's play another clip from March 11th.
You know, if you're too chicken and you got to sit on an anonymous account and you never show your face, that shows you're a bag. You know, that you're a cowardly piece of shit. And also, now that I didn't have the support a long time ago that I have now, but now that I do, you still haven't stopped. That just makes you stupid and reckless. And that you obviously don't care about yourselves or others. So my suggestion would be to stop. Stop. Because if you don't, we're just going to keep giving the stuff to the detectives as they piece it together. Okay. And once they find that one piece that they need, boo! So, anonymous heads, you really think that you're that slick? Stop it. Stop it.
So now the threat structure includes subpoenas, detectives, lists, investigators, and this larger story that anonymous critics are all part of some coordinated gang.
Which makes anonymity itself part of the target.
Exactly. And that comes through again here.
Like I'm done. I'm fucking tired of it. You know what I mean? There's a line that I totally accept, and if somebody makes something funny to me, I'll laugh at it. That's fine. You can make fun of me all you want, but stay out of my private life. Leave me the alone. I've said it 100 times, and now we're gonna have to do what we have to do in the court to find out who these anonymous are who think they have free speech to target somebody. That's not free speech.
There it is. The goal isn't hidden, it's to find out who you and others are.
Which is why the court's earlier response matters so much, because the court already saw subpoenas being used in that direction and said no.
And there's one more thing I want to bring up because I think it captures the broader lesson perfectly. If you've ever used an anonymous handle, posted criticism under a screen name, or participated in online commentary without tying it to your real world identity, you probably assume a baseline level of protection. But this case shows how fragile that boundary can be when legal process gets weaponized.
Yes, and that's what makes Mindy's restraining order case bigger than just her case. It's been a very important battle so far, even though it's mostly been delays. If discovery tools become a backdoor way to expose critics, then anonymous speech stops being a right in practice and starts becoming a luxury for people who can afford to defend it.
So when someone says people only object to subpoenas because they're guilty, remember what actually happened here. A court looked at the subpoenas, asked why they were issued, reviewed the surrounding evidence, found the requests overbroad, found the theory unsupported, and quashed them.
And then sanctioned the lawyer who issued them.
Which means objecting to a subpoena is not an admission of guilt. Sometimes it is simply what you do when someone tries to turn the legal system into a woodchipper for their critics.
And in this case, the court unplugged the machine.
Well, Cody, that's the record, and we'll keep documenting it.
Thanks, Zoe.
See you all next time.
Context and Character is produced with support from Silver Mesa Creative, which helped develop this series.